So when you mention sports kits, I've got to mention my first experience of yoga, which was when I was about 15, and I was doing my Duke of Edinburgh. And one of the sections was you had to do some sports.
Yes.
And I was the last to be picked at gym. I was that child. I was, not that I'm traumatized by it or anything, I was the child told by my PE teacher that my legs shouldn't be allowed out in public. Oh yeah.
Horrendous.
I've only just started wearing like skirts in the last 2 years.
Oh my God, that's horrendous.
And not bitter. I'm not going to do a shout out for her, but yeah. She knows. Anyway.
But that says more about her.
Oh, totally. But I decided I was going to do yoga because I thought it would be easy.
Oh, yeah.
It was the only thing that I thought, well, I can't do sports, but I'll do this easy thing. And then I turned up at this class. I was like, oh. And I think there was an element of, oh, we're expected to kind of like be with ourselves. So I just got the giggles.
Yeah, that's really common.
I giggled for an hour and I think I was too embarrassed to go back. And then my next experience, again, completely naive, was Iyengar yoga. And I decided to go on this retreat that was, and I think I missed something in the brochure. I saw yoga retreat. Apparently it was actually a yoga intensive.
Oh.
But I still thought, well, yoga, it's just a bit of stretching, isn't it? Oh my goodness. I have never been in so much pain. And so, yeah, so I'm curious about what are the misconceptions that people have.
I think that, well, again, it depends on which class you go to, because I think that there's some classes that probably do fit people's conceptions. But I think the biggest misconception, I would say, is that it's just exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all it is. I think yoga appeals to people who weren't good at sport.
Oh, yes.
I do think yoga appeals to people who weren't good at sport because it's non-competitive.
Mm-hmm.
But it's
but you're competing with yourself.
You're competing with yourself. But you're not supposed to. But you know that. And one of the things that I liked about yoga was, and it's something that I've just started to really realise as I've got older, is because I'm dyslexic and I'm dyspraxic. I've always had this fear of letting other people down when I'm playing sport. So I was never taught how to play sport properly because everyone just got frustrated with us. So I never really understood the rules of netball, and I never really understood the rules of hockey, and I never really understood the rules of badminton, and I never got to the point of being able to play it to a point. And I think what they do at school is, well, this was my experience at school anyway, was that they by the time we got to secondary school, they just assumed everyone could play, and the people who can't play mustn't want to play. So they never had this is how you play netball thing. They just said everybody play netball, and I would not be able to play because the other people was so much better than me.
Yeah.
So I would be letting people down, and because I didn't like that, I would say, oh, well, I don't want to play.
Yeah.
And then I would sit at the back and make jokes
and pretend
that I didn't want to play. And as I've become an adult and I've learned more about myself, I'm like, actually, I am really sporty, and I love sport, but I gravitated towards movement that I could do on my own.
Yeah.
So I liked running, I liked weightlifting, I liked yoga because it's stuff you can do on your own rather than, and I think that a lot of people like that about yoga is the fact that it's something that they can learn themselves rather than having to rely on other people to do. And I just, when you were saying that about your experience there, and I think there's a lot of people as well who do giggle.
Yeah.
And I think that's because it can be quite confronting.
Definitely.
But I think a misconception about yoga is that the yoga teacher will have never seen it before.
Yeah.
So I had two guys come recently, and they just made jokes and laughed all the way through it. But it's so obviously a defense mechanism. Yeah. And I don't mind.
So this kind of takes me to like part of the title of the podcast.
Yeah.
It's the Cynics Guide. And for me, quite often my cynicism manifests as the little joker in my head. that, when someone's being a little bit earnest and, serious or a bit spiritual, I'll have the little voice in my head that's rubbishing it with jokes.
Yeah.
What would you say to that? Is there any way of working with that? Have you got any experience of that?
I think that's a defense mechanism that we do when things are making us feel things.
Definitely.
So we don't like feelings. Well, maybe your listeners like feelings. Feelings are scary. Feelings are scary, and sometimes we hide behind feelings that we're less scared of. So often that might manifest in it hiding behind anger. So that's a really common one for people, where if they don't understand something, they'll just get angry at it.
Almost like, I didn't want to do it anyway.
I didn't want to do it anyway, yeah. Or they'll dismiss it in a cynical way. And I'm not saying that everybody, that's such a unfair thing, isn't it? Because then I'm like, any criticism of yoga is just because that's not what I'm saying. But I do think I know from my experience, because I'm the same, the minute that I'll make a joke about myself so that other people can't. So I'll point out the thing first and make a joke of it so the other people can't, because I've said that, so then other people can't say it because I've already said it.
It can't hurt you then.
It can't hurt me.
Like when you joke about not knowing your left from your right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that you do, and it's a defense mechanism that has served you at some point, and it's a healthy defense mechanism, because it's better than for, it's a much more productive one than other ones you can have.
Definitely.
But at some point we have to notice our defense mechanisms for what they are if we want to move past them, if we want to change.
Well, yeah, because it's stopping us from accessing things that on some level we want to access.
Well, yeah, of course.
We're missing out. And
I think that having an open heart, and oh God, I really do sound like a hippie now, but it's something that I'm really working on, because I close so quickly. Yeah. So it's an active thing. So I have a mantra every day, and this really getting into the hippie shit now, but I have my mantra is often on, I'm going to have an open heart. I'm going to be open to things today, because otherwise I could quite easily just live on my own and close myself off completely. But there is two states of being, isn't there? There's open or closed, fear or love. We have a lot of these two states, and I think the closedness comes from fear. Yeah. Because we've been hurt, or new things have hurt us, and it's a really important part of our evolution. It's a really important protective thing. It's there for a reason, but once the danger is past, is that serving you anymore? Exactly. And sometimes things are just a load of bullshit as well. So I think that you can, if you open your heart to it and it's still a load of bullshit, you can still walk away from it. It's just that if you notice, oh, I'm welling up, or I'm going to make a joke about it. Yeah. I almost feel with quite a lot of activities I do, I think of myself as someone who wants to believe. I want to be wholehearted, and I almost feel like I've stepped into something, and my inner cynic is like an overprotective parent holding onto my reins, and it's like, I don't need that anymore. Yeah. But it's still like, oh, wait, let me be safe. Do you not think that might have something to do with, because you're Liverpudlian, and I was brought up in Newcastle. Yep. And we are, like, who does she think she is? The original plan for this podcast was that it was going to be called The Northerner's Guide to Hippie Shit. Yeah. Because that was actually going to be my next question. Is this a northern thing? I don't know. I don't know. It might be a working class thing. It might be a northern thing. But I went to a comprehensive school, and, like, my family's not like that. Well, my mum's not like that. But, like, there are definitely people in my life that have that very, like, if you act in a way that's different, who do you think you are? I always remember, like, I played violin, and then people would pick on, like, at my school, people would pick on the people who were trying to better themselves. Yep. So if you like dared to carry a musical instrument to school, who do you think you are with your violin? And then you'd be called violin girl for the rest of the time. But people would, and obviously as an adult now, I would be like, oh yeah, I am playing the violin, whatever. Like I like the violin, bugger off. But it happens in your formative years, doesn't it? And it sticks. And I think there's a fear of freedom as well.
Yeah.
So I realised, oh my God, I bring everything. I know that if anyone's listening to this who has had a conversation with me in the past 2 years, 5 years, maybe 10 years, I just bring everything back to the fact my driving.
Oh, come on.
And I know that my fear of driving comes from a fear of freedom.
Ooh.
Because once I can drive, I'm free.
That's really interesting. I remember having a conversation with someone about smoking.
Mm-hmm.
She's got COPD, like really badly, chain smokes, and she said to me one time, I probably could give up smoking, but if I did that, I could do anything. So I'm not going to.
And it's about identity, isn't it? It's about that's who you are. So if you change that, if you're not the cynic, and I think that is one of the hardest things to overcome in growth. So when you grow, you change who you are and you leave people behind and you change your identity. So I so wrapped up in my identity is the cynical funny one.
Yeah. And of course, being a Scouser, there is an expectation that, I should be funny.
And actually you can be, you actually can be well adjusted and funny as well. It's just that we've so heard that there has to be pain in order to give up the pain. You have to give up all of the things that you've identified with the pain.
Yeah.
And that can be really hard because there's a reason why you're there. And that all those defense mechanisms are there because they've served you at some point. So I think it's really important that you're kind to yourself with it as well. But it's that whole thing, isn't it? If you can recognize something's there, but not let it drive.
Yeah. And kind of almost like if you can see or hear the cynical voice, kind of go, well, whose voice is that?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And kind of go, okay, so I hear you. Thanks for your input.
Yeah.
But let me do this hippie shit because I've paid for it, I've signed up, let me at least enjoy it.
And I suppose as well as when you're saying hippie shit, what is a hippie?
Well, yeah, that's a big question in itself.
And what's why are you so reluctant to be a hippie? And actually, Rachel, I think that you possibly are.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, this is the thing. I think of myself as being a cynical hippie.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I feel like I spend a lot of time straddling two camps.
Yeah.
And like, so if I was with a load of cynics, I would be like, you just don't understand.
Yeah.
And, you need to open up to all of this, and this. But if I'm with people who are really wholehearted, I'm like, ugh.
Do you think that's another, because I would say I'm a tiny bit of a reactionary contrarian. Or not in a alt-right kind of weird way, but I do have to watch that in myself where I'm like, if everybody says something's good, there's something in me that wants to say it's shit. And if everyone says that something's shit, then I want to say it's good. I have that and I think that might be a northern thing as well.
So does that mean that when everyone's watching the latest series on Netflix, you can't watch it?
I can't watch it until everyone's not watching it anymore. And it's and I don't know where that comes from. I watched something the other day that everyone was telling us to watch. I was gutted that I liked it.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I like that. But that's really good. Oh. And that's just part of, that's a defense mechanism that I've picked up from somewhere and it serves us and it can, I think in this quest to get to be better people, we can be really harsh on ourselves.
It's like we want to belong and we are scared of belonging at the same time.
Yeah. Because then you lose that outsider identity.
And even the parts of your identity that on some level, like, you know, are a bit messed up.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't want to let that go. I don't want to let the, you know, I don't know, the party animal or whatever it might be. It's like, I don't want to let her go, but might not be who you want to be anymore.
And also, you've got to remember that you can't curate the idea of yourself in other people's minds. So we're like in this identity because you're like, well, I wouldn't want to disappoint these people that I have just made up how they see me in their head anyway, because actually everyone who exists has a completely different idea of you anyway. And if you start trying to curate that, you're going to drive yourself completely potty. Because like I was a complete party animal when I was younger, and I think if people knew that actually, like if at the time, if people went, oh well, Jo is going to end up like a boring old fart, then they would be really surprised. But actually, this is who I've always been.
Yeah.
But I also think that we change daily anyway. So I don't, there's a real push, isn't there, for people to be authentic. And I don't think that exists.
No. And people don't like people changing.
No, well, no, because if they change, if you change, then they might have to change, or they might know that change is possible, or
scary,
or the person that you are to them might. We need people in our little dramas, don't we? We need people to play their roles and stay the same. And if they change, then I always remember I had an argument with somebody. We'll say it was my sister. It isn't my sister. If you're listening to this, she'll be like, this wasn't me. But let's say it was my sister. And I had an argument with her, and I said, you're not behaving the way that my sister would behave.
Oh.
And she said, well, I am your sister and I did behave like that, so what are you going to do about it? And I was like, oh yeah, she's totally right. Like, I am not seeing you.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that yoga teaches as well, which is that we need to be present. And that one of the things that we can do to other people is almost the more you know someone, the less you see them.
Oh, definitely.
Because you've already, because as humans, we put things in boxes and go, right, well, I understand that. Now I can think on something else.
Yeah. So in mindfulness, we talk about beginner's mind.
Exactly.
And,
exactly.
You know, we don't see the other person. We see the story about that person, or we see how they were in the first week that we met them.
Yeah.
And then it's confirmation bias as well, isn't it?
It's exactly all the same. It's the same thing. And I think that, and it's not where we could do it all the time, because I don't think that's what our brains are like.
That'd be exhausting.
Oh, you'd be completely insufferable if you're like, is this a table? Is this, like, you'd be just totally insufferable.
Who are you today?
Like, you know, when people who look at you really intensely when they're talking to you, you don't like, you don't need that, but it's every so often just dropping it in. And I think this about mindfulness, and you can correct me, obviously you can correct me if I have got this wrong about mindfulness, but for me, the goal isn't to actually be mindful all the time. It's to remember to be mindful. The goal isn't to live your life being mindful all the time. It's to build a habit to every now and then am I being mindful now?
Because to be able to access it,
yeah. And be like, if you can build a habit of checking in and saying, am I being present? Then rather than trying to be present all the time, because if you're present all the time, you actually couldn't be.
Or not like super focused presence anyway. Not like living your entire life like you're in a permanent meditation. That would be horrific.
Yeah. And I think our brains are designed to wander, and they're designed to, we'd be eaten by a lion if we were like, look at the flower all the time. We are designed to
be vigilant.
And I think that's, I don't know where I'm going with that.
I suppose you can be distracted and be aware that you're distracted at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
So I would say that's just, maybe it depends on how you define mindfulness as to whether it's a goal to be like that all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
And even the fact that, like choosing to play Candy Crush.
Yeah.
And making an active choice.
Yeah. I'm
going to veg out and play Candy Crush.
Well, I think there's a real, there's a real need in to be distracted as well. I don't think distraction is necessarily a bad thing. I think that sometimes it's the healthy thing to do, especially if you've been traumatized or you're having a panic attack or you're going through a grieving. Like if someone's in acute grief, I would say to them, don't come to my class. Like I've said to people, don't come. I haven't said you're not welcome, but I've definitely said maybe wait, go do Zumba.
Well, what I've said to you when I've been struggling, I've said, right, could we do poses that are so complicated that I have to stick my tongue out?
Yes, and
because the very reason is because if I'm so distracted by having both arms and one leg in the air at the same time, I can't worry about the stuff that I'm worrying about when I'm with myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really good point. It's and I suppose as well, like yoga can be fast, it can be slow, it can be what you do on your mat. You can tune into what you need that day as well. But I think people do have a very, they think they're doing it properly when it looks a certain way.
Yeah.
And
when you can Instagram it.
Yeah. And I think when people have got their mat out, they've got on the mat, they've done some yoga, they've done 45 minutes. And actually it's not obtainable for everyone, especially people who have kids and people with jobs or people with lives. So it's just not obtainable for everyone. And I think we just have to, it's parenting ourselves, isn't it? It's like, how do that little gap where you're not letting yourself off the hook, you are trying, but you're also not being hard on yourself.